Is Amanda Poole Walsh, and I am the founder of Astrology Hub. And Rick, I'm just gonna tell them. I think it's good to just make it official. We're officially going steady. This time, Rick reached out to me and said, Amanda, it's Friday. Are we going live or not? So this is it. This is our new normal, I guess.
This
And
is it. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Amanda's new Friday afternoon steady, I guess.
oh my God.
And Amanda, if I give you a ring, it'll be on the telephone.
Perfect.
You'll hear it. You'll hear me.
I'll take it.
Ring.
Perfect. Oh my gosh. Well, anyways, we're so happy to be here with all of you. We're going to be talking today about some of the retrograde action that is happening right now. We're going to actually expand upon a little bit the conversation that I had earlier today with Eddie Garcia on the invitation of Uranus and Taurus, and this idea of how to reinvent our relationship with the earth. And then whatever else we end up talking about. It's always an adventure with you, Rick.
Well, right back at you.
All right. So where do you want to start?
Well, it's Friday. We have a weekend. For those of you who used to have real jobs or go to school, you know, you remember that weekends were these artificial things where we took a break from what was happening. But since we've been taking breaks from our normal lives, whether it's meant long hours working in some sort of social, essential social capacity, or whether it's just being sheltering at home, the weekend has lost its meaning. But I think it's interesting because it brings up the notion that there's no such thing as weekend in the universe. It's a totally man-made artificial construct, that there is even no such thing as a week, or as, you know, a week is basically roughly a quarter of a lunar cycle, because that's the way we astrologically tell time. As we look at a cycle, we divide it in half. That would be a fortnight, from, you know, half of a new moon to new moon. And then we divide that in half and we say that that's a week, and we count, and we go, oh, there's about 7 days. Hey, there's 7 planets. Let's name each day after one of the planets. And so we have Sun Day, Moon Day, Mercury Day, Mars Day, Jupiter's Day, Venus Day, and Saturn Day. I mean, that's the way it works, but it's all in our heads. So here we are on the beginning of what used to be called the weekend, and we have the moon having moved into Sagittarius, which theoretically should lift everyone's spirits, even if you've been deep and dark and in the Scorpio moon, full moon shadows, trying to bring stuff out into the open. Well, today things are out in the open. And so I think we're going into the weekend with a sense of optimism, whether it's false or true. Time always puts different perspectives on things. And I think that buzz of that fiery energy of the moon in Sagittarius and trining Chiron and Aries, and there's this whole sense of you know, the Venus is in Gemini, and we have Mars in Aquarius and Saturn in Aquarius. There's definitely a kind of coming out of the depths and out of the waters. But the weird thing is that, as you mentioned, Amanda, we have 3 planets that are turning retrograde within a week. And that would be Saturn on Sunday, Venus on Tuesday, and Jupiter on Thursday. And although they don't turn retrograde until those days, the fact of the matter is that they're barely moving now. We're feeling that energy already. Venus, for those of you who have been paying attention, has been the last few days squaring Neptune. And Venus right now is at 21 degrees, 29 minutes of Gemini, within a degree of squaring Neptune. And Venus next week turns retrograde at 21, I think 50. So it's like we're a half a degree away, less than a half a degree away from where Venus will turn retrograde. So in the next 2 weeks, Venus doesn't even move a half a degree from where it is right now. Now you can say it's going direct, it's going retrograde, it's stationary, doesn't matter. She ain't moving, and she is square to Neptune, who's basically putting a big cosmic WTF up in the world on everything. Even though we thought we'd been living in a world of not knowing what's going on, now we're sure we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so tell us more about Venus and Neptune square. Like, what is that? So there's confusion. Tell us more about that energy.
Well, Venus and Neptune have a great deal of affinity to one another. Um, in fact, Neptune is referred to as the higher octave of Venus. If you think on a piano and you play, A below middle C and then A above middle C, it's an octave. And that octave has a resonance because they're same notes, but at double the frequency. Well, Venus and Neptune, like Mercury and Uranus, and like Mars and Pluto, are considered to be octaves of the same energy.
Mm.
And so Venus is personal love. It's I love you. That's Venus. Venus is personal love. It's what I like. It's what I'm attracted to. It's my sense of aesthetics. It's the magnetism or the repulsion, I guess, or the attractive or repulsive magnetism that I feel. But Venus is the beauty of the animal. I'm sorry, is the beauty of the plant. I want to say kingdom, but it's actually queendom because it's a feminine energy. So Venus is personal. As a morning star, it relates to Taurus, which is earth, which is touch, which is sensual. It's the senses. It's that which we can touch, taste, feel, see. There's nothing metaphysical about Venus in the Taurus side of the equation. It's physical. It's physicality. However, Venus as an evening star, relating to Libra, then it becomes an air sign, and air is metaphysical. Air, you can't see air, you see through air. And so Venus has this component of being both physical and imaginative. Venus, as she relates to Libra, is more about our sense of beauty. It's not holding a rose and going, oh, this smells, looks, is beautiful. Venus incarnate is anything that is physically beautiful, whether it is a flower in your hair, whether it's you, whether it's a photograph, whether it's a fine meal that we're just about to sit down to have, a brilliant glass of wine, poetry, music. All these things impinge upon our senses. But as soon as you take the other side of Venus, you look at Libra and it's about being diplomatic. Where's the senses there? It's the go-between. Libra, but she's still making things nice. Libra is the peacemaker. Libra is John Lennon, singing Imagine, there's no heaven, imagine there's no hell. This is Libra. This is finding the equanimity to peace, perfection, harmony. It's the interior designer or the exterior designer, not the gardener. The gardener is Venus and Taurus. But the person who says, I think that would really look great over there if that whole area was reddish and maybe begonias and maybe tulips for the spring or whatever. And then that's Libran, because you're doing spatial relationships between things. It's not your hands in the soil. Okay, so Venus is personal. Regardless, it's what I think, it's what I sense, it's what I imagine is beautiful. It's my sense of perfection and beauty. And just to put a little piece of a stub of a rabbit hole that we can return to, all of this is based upon something that the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Renaissance philosophers and artists knew, and that is that there is an absolute 100% connection between our sense of aesthetics and beauty and this magical ratio called the golden mean, or the divine proportion. And it turns out that Venus in the sky is the golden mean proportion to Earth. We'll come back to that. So that's fascinating, but it's all personal.
Right.
Neptune, as the higher octave of Venus, has nothing to do with I love you. Instead, it's love. It's, for those of you who remember Peter Max, what was the painter in the 60s that did the rainbows and the unicorns and the big bold colors and like Yellow Submarine. So Neptune is like capital L, capital O, capital V, capital E. That's not "I love you." That's an Aquarian, depersonalized, Piscean, spiritualized love. It's agape. It's love extended to the infinite reaches of the universe, where there is no personal involvement in it. It's bigger. It's bigger than my love for you, this, that, whatever. And so when Venus and Neptune, they're always dancing. And in fact, they always, on some level, confuse us as to what we're dealing with, whether this is my personal taste or whether this is something that's really cosmic. Because Neptunian agape or love or the spiritual. Neptune is dreams, it's imagination. I mean, it can be beautiful, but it's also confusing, because the word confusion means with fusion. Con, Greek for like with, like a conjunction, and fusion is when two things melt together. So Neptune is confusing because my ego and your ego survive because the sun has the light at the center and Saturn creates a boundary. Our ego can, and Mars defends that boundary, but our egos survive because there's a boundary between you and me. Neptune comes along and says, I'm in love. There is no boundary between you and me. And the ego goes, ah, because that's confusing. Because if I can't separate me from you, then how do I have a point of view? How do I have a perspective? How do I figure out what I'm going to do? I can't. And so Neptune's job is to confuse us by melting the apparent boundaries, Saturn, the stop sign, the edge of the crystal. And Neptune melts that away, which is confusing. And the fascinating thing here is that confusion is the primary reason why people embark on a spiritual journey. In fact, the idea of whether it's agape love, a spiritual journey towards finding that, or romantic personal love, there has to be confusion involved, because if there's no confusion, there's no vulnerability. Thank you, Brene Brown. If there's no vulnerability, there's no intimacy, there's no connection. Boundaries exist until we become confused. So Neptune and Venus are always there, but every now and then they make very exacting aspects. And normally Venus moves relatively quickly, so Venus holds an aspect for, a day or two or three, and then it goes on and it makes the next aspect. Well, Venus has just moved into Venus in Gemini, a mutable air sign. At 20 degrees of Gemini, Venus squared Neptune, which is at 20 degrees of Pisces. And so that square occurred last week. But then Venus is slowing down. It turns retrograde. When it slows down to go retrograde and then turns retrograde, it moves very, 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 very slowly. And it turns out that Venus was actually exactly square Neptune on May 3rd. So we opened the month on May 1st. It was already close enough to be square. Venus turns retrograde technically, I think I'd already said this, on the 12th. Venus turns retrograde. But Venus actually makes once it goes direct and it goes back through the same territory again, it squares Neptune, moving backwards for the second time on May 20th. And in fact, it won't square Neptune for the third and final time until mid-late June. I think it's June. I don't have the date in front of me right now. Point being that whatever the conflict, whatever the dynamic stress, dynamic stress, whatever the potential for creativity, creative, whatever that square is between Venus and Neptune isn't just holding for 2 or 3 days like it normally does. It's holding for, pretty much all of May, and then it'll be back again in about a month to kind of, clean us through this. Venus and Neptune together is romanticism. Remember, the age of romanticism was kind of a reaction to the age of enlightenment, where we thought that the intellect could know everything. And along comes in the early 19th century, you have the poets, Shelley, Keats, Byron. These romantic poets brought Venus Neptune into the mix. And in fact, there was a Neptune Pluto alignment during the years of the rise of romanticism. And so Venus Neptune together is basically romantic because it mixes up imaginations and dreams and fantasy with this feels nice, and they're square. So that's where we are. We are in the midst of this energy, and it's not going away. And that makes it more confusing. Normally, we can take confusion for a day or two or three, because then things begin to gain clarity again. But this confusion about the confusion is so confusing that we end up being confused because even though we know what's right, even though we can listen to opposing views and go, yeah, that one makes sense, then all of a sudden it doesn't, or some aspect of it doesn't. And so it's a very, very, very tricky time, aside from all the other things that are going on.
Okay. All right. So what are we confused about? Like, how does this actually, I'm confused about what we're confused about. Are we confused about the story that's happening right now? Is this, I get that it's both, it's personal and non-personal. So there's going to be aspects to that, but are we confused in our relationships? Are we just, is it basically whatever you feel confusion around right now, it's going to stay confusing for a while?
I think so. But although I picked on the word confusion, and it's a good word, it's not the only way this can manifest.
Okay.
This is also imagination. It's also fantasy. It's also the ability to creatively make something appear that is coming from the realms of fantasy, illusion, imagination. But that's what Saturn hangs its hat on. We kind of are very quick to go, oh, that's just a fantasy. Yeah, well, so was an airplane one day. William Blake wrote, what is now proved was once only imagined. And that is, and so for people to dismiss a fantasy or dismiss imagination, oh, that's not real. Yeah, well, all of this at one time was not real, unless you assume or accept the fact that imagination is real. It's just as real as what's out there. It's just not manifest physically in form. And so I'm not being dismissive here. I'm not saying that we're just confused and we don't know what to do. We're also in an amazing place where we can take the fantasies and the dreams and the hopes and the imagine there's no heaven and imagine there's no hell. And we can take all of this stuff and we feel the stress. And what does stress do? It motivates us to be creative, and squares are creative. Without a square in your chart or in a relationship or by transit, we're amoebas. We're just floating, downstream, where, someone said, only dead bodies go with the flow. Well, with a square, we resist the flow at certain places and certain times. So I don't know in your life what you're confused about or what you're dreaming or what your fantasies are. And I don't need to know all of them. We're not going that steady. No, but seriously, we all have places in our life where there's something that's outside reality. And this square is tickling, stimulating, irritating, stressing those. And we can either go into denial and push them away, or we can label them fantasy and not real, or we can explore them. And that may not be an easy thing to do, but that may be where magic can occur.
I love that you brought that up, because I've been feeling that so strong, and how important it is right now for us to, even if it's just through exposing ourselves to stories or other people's fantasies or dreams of what's possible, to be in that field, because it does feel potent. And even if we don't know what to do with it yet, it's not like, okay, we're going to get the vision, we're going to implement. It's like, no, just be in that imaginal space. And that's one of the reasons why I invited Eddie on for our earlier broadcast, is because he is demonstrating with his life that we can reimagine ways of working with the earth. They were able to take a parking lot, a quarter of an acre cement parking lot, and turn it into a plot of land that was producing more food for the community than anyone could imagine in a year. So it's these kinds of ideas. It's like, well, oh, that's unrealistic. Or how would I do that if I'm in a city? It's like, well, there's ideas for cities. There's ideas for the desert. There's ideas for everywhere. And if we can allow ourselves to play in that space a little bit, who knows what we can dream up.
And I think that that's part of this weekend, part of the Sagittarius moon that we have today and tomorrow. That would be Friday and Saturday. I think the moon goes into Capricorn. I can tell you real quickly here. The moon goes into Capricorn, on Sunday morning. But until then, and that'll be when we maybe want to take some of these dreams and begin to make them real, or to think about making them real. But right now, this energy doesn't require us, this is ideal for Taurus, doesn't require us to do anything other than to explore the dream, to allow the fantasy to have life, to give it, to encourage its existence. Because as we do that, I mean, this is, Dr. Joseph Dispenza 101. You don't have to do it. You have to think about it. Because if you think about it, that creates the pathways in the brain, and the brain can't distinguish whether it happened or whether it thought it happened. Now, obviously, in order to make something quote unquote real, meaning in the three-dimensional world, we eventually have to externalize it. But part of this is using the technology of what we know about the brain and how it works, and to give ourselves permission to stretch into realms of like, what if maybe this, I was telling the story to someone a couple of weeks ago, and I have some close friends who a few years ago went very deep down into the flat earth hole, let's call it. And my position was, flat earth is not a theory, it's just a sign of stupidity. I mean, that was my, immediate response. But I watched some of the videos and I listened to some of the material, and and I basically made a list of 17 things that if you could answer any 5 of these, and within the flat earth theory, then I'll talk to you about the other 12. But until then, I'm not interested in having that talk. But what it did for me was something very fascinating. And that is because I didn't just reject it out of hand, because I allowed myself to question. It basically sent me down this rabbit hole of, how do I know anything? How do I know? How do I really know? Look, if we had lived 500 years ago, we would have known certain things that now we just think are foolish. What things do we know now that in 500 years, assuming that we haven't poisoned ourselves off the planet, what will we know in 500 years that we'll look back at the 20th, 21st century and go, boy, were they ignorant. They thought, fill in the blank. We can't. And so all I'm suggesting is that with this Venus square Neptune is, don't be so fast to judge. And it's the things that we know the most definitely, most certainly, those are the things that we at least need to allow ourselves to think. There's another aspect going on now that is incredibly powerful and fits into this. And that is that Mercury moving toward the end of Taurus. Mercury this weekend is trining, Mercury is trining Pluto tomorrow on the 9th, and then it trines Jupiter on the 10th, and then it trines Saturn on the 12th. Now, and incidentally, that becomes an energy that is followed up the following week by the Sun trining Pluto, and then trining Jupiter, and then trining Saturn, over through the middle toward the end of the month. Now, what does this mean? We've been obviously spending a lot of time in the Saturn-Pluto, the Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto. I mean, they're still in conjunction. I mean, there's Pluto is at almost 25 degrees, just turned retrograde. Jupiter is at 27 degrees Capricorn, about to turn retrograde. Saturn is at 2 degrees of Aquarius. You can think of that as 32 degrees of Capricorn to get this picture. They're all within about 8 degrees of each other, 7 degrees of each other right now. And so as planets move through late Earth and into early Gemini, as Mercury does first and then the Sun, they're going to sweep through a trine to deep, intense, shadowy, underworld, hidden, powerful, transformational Pluto, making our thoughts much deeper, more intense, and uncovering more that's been hidden than perhaps we ever thought we would or could or wanted to. And then it's going to trine Jupiter, and then we're going to philosophize and have big ideas from this and to go, what does this mean? Where can I go with this? And then it's going to trine Saturn. It's a trine to Saturn. They'll hit the wall, but the wall that it'll hit will be a wall of giving it structure and stability and sensibility. Now, I'm just saying that this is occurring within this larger period of time of fantasy and dreams. So we kind of need to breathe with this process, almost like it was waves washing on the shore. You know, that waves come in sets. You know this. You're an ocean gal, and the waves that come in sets. Right now, we're in this large set of waves that have to do with Venus, Neptune, fantasy, dreams, illusions, and all of that. But within it, we're getting this deeper, almost kind of like an undertow or riptide, if you will, that's pulling us into this area of deep and powerful that is grounded. That's the stuff behind the stuff, and we're going there in thought, Mercury trining, and then with the Sun. So, you know, the energies here are incredibly powerful and they're very exciting. And it's also like anytime you're in a place of strong tidal currents, if you're not a good swimmer, it's a very dangerous place to be.
Well, plus don't fight it. Don't fight the current. Like you need to have a certain level of surrender, and surrender doesn't mean give up, but it just means allow. And
there was a time once that it was one of the times in my life that I actually recall I'm going to die. And I was swimming alone. Don't do that. I'm an Aries, but don't do that. I was swimming alone in St. Augustine, Florida. And I'm very comfortable in the water. And I was out past the break where the waves were breaking, and I was just enjoying, you know, a good swim. And I kind of realized, I'm getting tired. I probably should head back. And I looked to get my bearings where I was on the beach, and the beach was like a dot. I mean, it was like, where'd the beach go? And I mean, I was way down from the beach, and I panicked because I realized that there was a strong current that was pulling me in a way that I didn't even realize, because I wasn't swimming any different than I would normally swim. And in that moment, I realized, oh my God, I'm really exhausted. I'm really holy shit, and I began to panic. And then I said, you know, Rick, you've been through this training. You know what to do, you know, and panicking and swimming against the tide or the current is not what you need to do. What you need to do is absolutely just float and catch your breath. Just, you know, if the tide's going to carry you, you know, off to, you know, Cuba at this point in time, that's not your problem. Your problem is regaining your center, finding your breath, and breathing. But for a moment, I realized the ocean doesn't give a shit about me, and I'm going to die. And needless to say, I, you know, did a jellyfish float or whatever you want to call it. And I breathed for a little bit until I got it. And I realized, I kept taking bearings, and I realized the current was pulling me this way. And I do what any educated swimmer would do, is I actually got a direction of where the tide was going, or the current. And I swam exactly 90 degrees to that until I realized I wasn't moving anymore. And then I worked my way back. But you can't resist the tide or flow with it if you don't know where it is, where it's going, and how strong and long it'll last. Because there are some tides that you don't want to go with the flow, because they're taking you right toward Victoria Falls or Niagara Falls. And if you don't resist it, you will go over the falls. And that's worse than panicking and trying to swim against it.
Very true. Well, and isn't that what astrology is doing? Is it's helping us understand what the nature of the tide is, how long it's going to last, when to stop and breathe and just be and get your center, when to actually move, when, where we need to go and direction to it.
Exactly.
The other thing that you said is that when you were having that moment, it was like, stop, Rick, you know what to do. You've been training for this and you know what to do. So I think so much of the invitation right now is for each one of us to trust that we are resourced. If we can just listen to that deep, still, small voice and trust it, we are resourced. We will be guided to right action. If we're not too, frenetically taking in everybody else's opinion about what to do and how to do it. That's another thing. But then the other thing, as you were explaining about the dream and the vision, and then the Pluto, the undertow and the deep transformation, it's almost what I got from that is it's almost as if in the exploration of the dream and in the exploration of possibilities and the future and our role in it, that is giving us the opportunity for this transformation. Like we're actually transforming through the allowance of what's possible. Like, what could this become? Who could we become? What could this look like on the other side?
Yeah.
And so that it's just like this dual process happening.
Do you know why a dancer doesn't get dizzy when he or she are doing spins, pirouettes very rapidly?
Because
we've
they
all
spot.
seen, huh?
Because they
Say it
spot.
again.
They spot.
They pick a point that becomes stable data.
Yes.
And that's what prevents them from throwing up or having and in fact, as a scuba diver, having spent many hours on charter boats or boats in the ocean where people were getting like really bad seasick, when you're on a boat and you get seasick, what you do, I mean, it's too late to take Dramamine or whatever cures you thought you were going to take and then forgot, and then you're all of a sudden white-faced and not feeling good at all. Basically, what you need to do is you need to go out on deck and stare at the horizon. That's what all the old salts, all the old, fishermen and seamen will tell you, is because when you go out on the deck and you stare at the horizon, all of a sudden, even though you may be rocking, it's that same piece of stable data. And in the midst and there's a very deep psychological truth here. It goes back to something that I wrote 50 years ago, and it's a little couplet, and it goes like this: too much looking often blinds. Too much looking often blinds the eye that seeks yet never finds. Too much looking often blinds the eye that seeks yet never finds. And this little passage went on to say, but be careful where you stop looking, for when you stop looking, that becomes truth. And so when we pick that stable data in the midst of swirling confusion, whether that stable data is astrology, Jesus, Nam Yoho Renge Kyo, Shoshuran Buddhism, whether it's Dianetics, Scientology, quantum physics, whatever it is you pick, boom, that's it. The world stops spinning. You have a stable data. It's good news and bad news. The good news is you've stopped spinning. The bad news is you may over-fixate, just like a baby duckling will imprint on the first living thing it sees, whether it is its mother or a human being, and it will follow that around forever as if it was its mother. And so we have to be careful about that stable data, because then that becomes truth over everything else, and even things that should spin us a little bit then don't.
That's interesting and confusing.
Well, but it's the way it works. I mean, this is a very real very real mechanical thing as to how we react in the outer world.
Right. For me right now, it's so important to focus on what feels like eternal truths, eternal spiritual truths that are just there, universal laws, natural laws. And yeah, I guess even those could be disrupted at some point, but they
Well,
feel
and again, understand that many people get those spiritual or eternal truths from
from a
very
person.
narrow slits of cult
Right.
teachings. And I'm going
Yes.
to say cult teachings that may include some of the largest churches on the planet. But without naming names, we have to be careful about what we take as eternal truth. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
And yes, it's confusing.
No, but that's very true. And that to me comes back to resonance and your ability to discern what truly resonates at a soul level versus what's like, not so much, like that doesn't feel right.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. Cause we could be fixated on the deliverer of the quote unquote eternal truth. Yes. Okay. The other thing that you were saying that's interesting to talk about, and then can we talk about the term desire? So of the stars. So
Sure.
yeah,
But
because
you had
because
something
part
else.
yeah. Okay. The other thing is this idea. One of our inner circle members sent me this article about the Hawaiian wayfinders,
Yeah.
how they used the stars to navigate, and they were just expert mastery levels at using the stars to navigate. But one of the things you brought up is to me, what we're doing at Astrology Hub, what we're doing as we study astrology is we are actually using the stars to navigate our way. And that both means what's happening astrologically from the transits perspective, but also our chart, the wisdom of our chart and what's coded into the chart and what the chart says about our path and our way, quote unquote, home, right?
Mhm.
So using the stars to navigate our lives. And that brings me to desire, because the
Wait,
word
before we get to desire, just a comment on the using the stars to navigate. It's a valid point. I totally agree with you. But there were in the Pan-Asiatic South Pacific Islands, not just Hawaii, but the
Polynesian,
island. Huh?
Polynesian,
Yeah,
the
I'm sorry, Polynesian. I couldn't think of the word. Thank you. That the people who would go out in these boats into just empty open water, they used the stars for navigation, but they also could discern the distance of land in any direction by the sounds of the waves lapping on the boat. Now,
Mm,
we have such limited sensory apparatus because we've been tuned down a particularly reality tunnel. And I'm not saying that anything you said was untrue. I'm just saying it's not just our visual sense. We have other senses that we've totally lost touch with, that were there.
I totally agree with you. Yes, and I see this time as an amazing opportunity for us to continue. Those abilities are still there. Lost. We have lost touch with the band of frequency in which they exist still. So
Yeah.
that's why we keep talking about doing your practices, doing the things that connect you to that unseen realm, because that is part of your navigation system too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
before the internet, there was the internet.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, people communicated over vast distances, whether we would like to believe that or not, doesn't
Yes.
matter.
Yes. Okay.
Desire.
So desire. So Adam Gainsbourg told me about this word. He was the first one that decoded it for me. I was like, whoa, that's amazing. So decidere, of the stars. And so that desire in you, and I'm bringing us back to this dream, imagination, those ideas that you may be having right now. The desire is pointing you in the direction of your chart. I mean, if we're going to get like granular about astrology, but that desire is coded in you, and it's something to actually pay attention to and actually go toward, because it is part of you living that blueprint that is you. So I just want to bring that up and I want to hear your thoughts on it, but as additional confirmation to dream right now, to allow yourself to fantasize about what could be and what you could contribute to that what could be. But I just love to hear your thoughts on decidere.
Well, yeah, I think it just goes back to our lost connection, not just with the stars, but our lost connection, period. Something about our lives that we are all dealing with issues of abandonment, whether it's personal, romantic, parental, educational, cultural disenfranchisement. I mean, all of these are variations on abandonment, but there's another level of abandonment that has to do with our disconnection from the cosmos, from the net order, from the beautiful order of things. And I think that Venus and desire is the magnetism that draws us to wanting to re-experience the home planet. And I don't mean that physically as a planet. I mean that as a construct, as an idea of being connected with the stars. And there are certainly indigenous people who remained way more connected with the stars than we can possibly imagine. I'm sure many of you know about the Dogons in Western Africa, and the Dogons lived along the Niger River just before it reached the Atlantic Ocean, but they were inland far enough that they didn't go to the ocean. And the Dogons were cliff dwellers, and the Dogons were, their beliefs were very, 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 very important to them. They believed that they came to Earth and that their ancestors were dolphins, but they believed they came to Earth from the stars. And they did a renewal worship that was, what's the word, across pan-generational, that every 60 years, every 60 years, they would spend almost a generation, well, like about 10 years, in very, very specific year-by-year ritual preparing for this every 60-year cycle of death, rebirth, renewal for the entire people. And the Dogons believe that they came from what we call Sirius, which is the dog star. Think about that. And it turns out that in 1957, we meaning the Western world, learned that the star Sirius, which is the star of all stars, it's the center of our little cluster of stars in this part of the galaxy. Sirius is like larger and bright. It's the brightest star in the sky. But we learned that Sirius was a binary star. And what we see in the sky as Sirius is now called Sirius A. And Sirius B, binary star, revolves around Sirius every 60 years. We did that confirmation.
Shoot, Rick, you're cutting out. I don't know if it's me. But
I don't either.
You were just
how much of that did you get?
So I got, well, I got Sirius A and Sirius B, and one of them orbits around the other.
Yeah, so the Dogon had this major ritual that they did every 60 years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we only found out in the mid-20th century that Sirius, the star that they believed they came from, was a binary star that had a 60-year cycle.
A 60-year cycle. Wow.
The
so
binary star B went around Sirius A once every 60 years.
And you can't see that with the visible eye.
No, we didn't even know that it was, science didn't know that it was a binary star until 1957.
Wow. So they just knew.
Desire, connection with the stars. We've been way more connected than we are, and we don't even know how disconnected we are. Our longing. Carl Jung wrote one of the latter books. He wrote a book called Modern Man in Search for a Soul. We're longing for this something that we've lost. And what we've lost is we feel abandoned, but it's we who have abandoned our connection with nature. with the natural order. We can live in a world where species are going extinct and saying, no, that's out there. It doesn't have anything to do with me. You know, and what we are beginning to be confronted with, first experimentally in quantum physics, and now experientially, is there is no out there out there. Out there is not out there. There are not 12 signs up there in the sky. There's 12 signs in here in our minds. And it's not about connecting with nature out there. It's about connecting with nature in here, which then automatically connects us with nature out there, because there's no difference between in here and out there. And this is the cure for the confusion.
Ah, God, that was so brilliant. You were cutting in and out a little bit, but I could follow it. I hope everybody else could too, because it was like brilliant. And I know a lot of people in the audience have probably had this experience themselves. I know I have. When I decided to leave New York and move to Hawaii, the closer and closer I got to nature, the closer and closer I got to myself.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that even some of my like disgust about nature, like, ooh, I don't want to touch that thing, or I'm afraid to go into that thing, it's all a reflection of the areas of myself that I didn't want to touch or go into. So it is this perfect, beautiful mirror. And I hope that you all caught that. And maybe, that would be great to just sort of retranscribe it, because it was really brilliant. Thank you.
I had the experience in Bali of a builder of this retreat center that I stay at. And I'm telling you this story that was told to me by my friend who owns the retreat center, that the old man who designed all the buildings and was like a Buddha of sorts. I mean, he was a Balinese who was ageless. And one day there was a bit of a brouhaha because several Westerners there came over, and at the corner of the meditation hall, there was a viper, which are snakes that are in fact poisonous, and they're fast. And you don't want to get bit by a viper and not get an antidote like within an hour. And so we in the West would figure out some way to trap that viper and kill it. That's what we would do. It's in our space. This guy went over and sat next to the viper, just sat down, and he just sat there. And he sat there, and in about 20 minutes, the viper just went away. And my friend asked him, he says, what was that about? He said, oh, I just basically told the viper that it was not good for him to be in this spot, that it was, that he needed to go back to where he could be safe, and he was not safe here. And away it went. Not a unique story.
Not a unique story. I actually had this experience where I was there were like these 3 wild dogs, stray dogs on the Big Island. These are not dogs you want to mess around with. Yeah. And I was on a walk, and they stopped, and we were like looking at each other, and they were growling, and it was clear that they were about to attack. And I just stood there. It was maybe one of my first experiences of my own strength, and the strength of the field that is created, that Neptune field, because there was a basically don't come here, but also I created a field of love, and I just like stood in that field. And after a period of time, they turned around and ran away, and it was like, whoa, I don't even know what just happened. But I think for so many of us right now, those fears and the fears of darkness, or someone, or losing control, or losing sovereignty, or losing the ability to make our own,
losing our health,
all of these fears. It's like there's this process that I can feel happening for so many people, where we're needing to reclaim our power and reclaim our sovereignty and reclaim our ability to say, no, not in this space. Like, you are not welcome in this space. And this is not the space for you. Like he said to the snake, like, this is not the right space for you. And there's so many things happening and swirling around us. And we can actually do that with all of those things. And it's powerful, and it's hard to quantify, because it's not it's not a tangible thing. It is more an energetic
In the
field.
first Star Wars movie, Obi-Wan Kenobi is walking into the Death Star, and he has R2D2 and 3CPO behind him, and they're walking down this path, and they come up to this Star Trooper who's like wearing the white and black masked uniform, holding this huge laser-like gun, and they walk up to him, and Obi-Wan Kenobi just turns and says, "These are not the droids you're looking for." And the guy never moves, and they just keep going by. Boundary. Old Jedi practice. I'm not the human you are looking for, dog.
Exactly.
You don't see me.
Very powerful.
Venus
Rick,
square Neptune.
Venus square Neptune. Is there anything else you want to add about the astrology of the moment, or do you
Anything
feel like
is possible when Venus is square Neptune? It's I think of my friend Caroline Casey, who for years has said that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. That dreams, imagination, fantasy, illusion, these things only become troublesome if we mistake them and put them in place of what our senses tell us that's going on around us. However, they are also the things that inspire us. The dreams actually create the breakthroughs in poetry, music, art, science. It's the dreamers that basically lay those, those tracks. It's almost like Neptune creates gossamer. Oh, this is going to be a good one. Neptune creates gossamer scaffolding for Saturn to come in and create structures on.
Perfect. So dream, everybody. Allow yourself to play in that realm of imagination. I love the question of what is that desire in you that is wanting to come forth, and what is the contribution that you're here to make? And maybe check out your chart and see if there's clues there if you're not sure. But at the same time, allow the process. And this is not a process that we need to force. It's like just play in that field. So, and when we go, oh, but that's not possible, or oh, how would I do it, or why me? Like, how would I be able to do it? Just let all that go for now. We don't need to worry about any of that stuff right now. Just allow it to come through as much as possible.
Yeah.
So, Rick, thank you. This is just a very pleasurable, steady Friday afternoon. Yay. I love it. Thank you so much for being willing, for being able, for being here with us. And thanks to all of you for continuing to show up and to continue to tell us or share with us what it is that you're enjoying, what you want more of. These special editions and all this content for you through this time, it's for you. I mean, I have to say I get a lot out of it too, but it's definitely here for you. So thank you very much for being here. And for those of you who want to get alerts I keep saying that. For those of you who want to get the weekly summary of all the special edition content that went out, just go to astrologyhub.com/podcast and sign up. We'll send you a weekly email that says, here's everything you can tune into. And for those of you who haven't checked out the course that we did with Rick Levine, The Astrology of Relationships, that's an amazing course. It's still available. So if you do want to check out The Astrology of Relationships, Rick taught a brilliant class for us here at Astrology Hub. And it is a little bit, I would say if you're a brand new beginner to astrology and you don't even know how to look at a chart yet, it might be a little too advanced for you. But if you're starting to get into chart reading and you're starting to understand aspects and things like that, then you'll love it. So check it out. That's astrologyhub.com/relationships. All right, Rick.
Thank you, Amanda, as always. It's been fun. And see you next week.
See you next week. All right. Take care, everybody. Aloha.